Hindustan, Triumphs and Travails of Madhavrao Peshwa. Like we had said in the past two discussions, even this book is replete with color plates, maps, illustrations, a list of the dramatis personae which you will not find in any other book on the history of any empire or the confederacy, as we call it, the Maratha confederacy. So it's really a treasure house of information. I would really heartfully like to congratulate Dr. Uday S Kulkarni on this research work which he has put together so painfully and so perfectly. We are really happy and overjoyed to have with us Dr. Kulkarni. For those who are not here for the previous two sessions, Dr. Kulkarni is an alumnus of the AFMC Pune. He is a retired surgeon commander of the Indian Navy, continues his surgeries in Pune, in addition to writing books. And like I was telling you all last time, his focus is largely on 18th century Indian history, specifically Maratha history. We'd also like to welcome Dr. Gaurav Gadgil, who teaches history in the KJ Somaiya College. And Dr. Gadgil is a scholar in his own right, received many awards, including the President of India's Global Gold Medal. Although we had one more additional panelist for the first two sessions, unfortunately he couldn't be here today because of prior commitments. But we are also happy to moderate the session with Ms. Soniya Khare. Ms. Soniya Khare has been with Dr. Kulkarni since the inception of writing the trilogy. She is an expert copywriter, having been a senior copy editor with the Oxford University Press. Like I always say, stickler for perfection. She has been very closely involved, like I said, with Dr. Kulkarni's books. So now I'd like to request Ms. Soniya Khare to please take this forward. And of course, like I said, since this is the final session of the trilogy, we would expect a good discussion and then a summing up maybe of the entire trilogy. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Arati. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's nice to be back here for the third and final session of discussion on the trilogy of the Peshwas. As we saw in the first two sessions, we talked about Bajirao and Nana Sahib Peshwa. Bajirao at a very young age was appointed Peshwa after the death of his father, Balaji Vishwanath. When he became the Peshwa, the Maratha state was a small kingdom, but in his 20 years as Peshwa, he transformed it into an empire. And what Nana Sahib inherited as the next Peshwa was an empire. He carried forward the momentum and took the Maratha Empire to greater heights, to the peak of its power. And as we discussed and saw in the last session, he was there he was handling the affairs at a time when there were great turning points in the Indian history in mid-18th century. Unfortunately, the loss in the Third Battle of Panipat in January 1761 is seen by some as a blip in his career, and that is something which has been debated quite a lot. In the normal course of things, after Nana Sahib, his son Vishwas Rao would have been appointed the next Peshwa, but he was killed in the Battle of Panipat, and the responsibility fell upon the very young Madhavrao. We've seen that Bajirao as well as Nana Sahib, they were hardly 20 years old when they became the Peshwa, but Madhavrao was even younger, he was just 16. And while Bajirao had the support of his younger brother Chimaji Appa, and Nana Sahib had his cousin Sadashiv Rao Bhau and younger brother Raghunath Rao, Madhavrao was completely on his own. An entire, like Dr. Kulkarni said, galaxy of administrative and military leadership had been lost in the Battle of Panipat. And it felt as if everything was lost. But we will now see through today's discussion exactly why Dr. Kulkarni calls this book a narrative of the rescue of an empire. So let us now begin. I would like to begin by asking Dr. Kulkarni, what were the circumstances in which Madhavrao was made the Peshwa, and what happened between the loss in January 1761 till Nana Sahib's death in June 1761, and what were the circumstances when Madhavrao was appointed Peshwa?
At the time of Battle of Panipat, Nana Sahib was already halfway towards the north. He had his army of about 10,000 people. He was near Jhansi at that time. And that's when he got the news, actually a few days before that the battle had been lost and a lot of people had been killed. But there was no authoritative news that his cousin, Sadashirao Bhau, was dead, or that his son, Vishwasrao, was dead, or what exactly was the damage which had occurred. And he kept sending people to different places, as far as Patiala and Ajmer and so on, because there was news used to come that Bhau is with Allah Singh Jat, or somebody used to say he's in Ajmer. So he used to send people there to find out that is he still around, is he still there, if there, please bring him here and so on. And the roads were very unsafe. So it is not as if you could just, if you're alone, you could walk back to your homes. You could be looted on the way, and the entire place was in a turmoil. So a few months were spent in looking at that. On the other hand, you find in Delhi, Ahmad Shah Abdali was already sitting in the city. And he was worried that Nana Sahib is coming north. He had no idea that Nana Sahib's own health was so bad that he could not have come forward and fought another battle. But there were people giving contrary advice on both sides, and go ahead and take back Delhi. His own brother, Raghunath Rao's letter which he writes to his brother, that if you were in good health, and if you had an army of 100,000 people with you, I would have advised you to go to Delhi. But in your present state of health, with just 10,000 people, I cannot bring myself to give you that advice. So that was the situation which Abdali was not aware. And Abdali sent his wakils to Nana Sahib asking him that let us sign a treaty. He sent him robes of honor, and he sent an elephant, and those which was the sign of an olive branch almost on those days. And he said, I will leave the administration of Hindustan to you, as long as Shah Alam is again confirmed as the emperor. Of course, Shah Alam was sitting in Allahabad. He was an absentee emperor. There was no king in Delhi. There was no wazir in Delhi. Shujaudullah went back to Awadh. So the whole city of Delhi was without a king, without a wazir. And Abdali was keen to go back. He didn't want another war. His own troops were rebelling against him, that we are in arrears of pay. He kept sending messages to Madhav Singh of Jaipur and Surajmal Jat that come and pay me so much money, which they refused to do. And his army refused to go and extort the money from these people. So in the end, he finally had to leave Delhi around the 20th of March. And around the same time, Nana Sahib also turned back towards the Deccan, again in very frail health, in a very disturbed state of mind. Some of his statements at that time are very, almost as if he's in a delirium, that I'm a very great sinner, I did this, I did that, I did these wrong things. One day I had slapped my brother at so and so place. So, those kind of letters we find that time. And this state of mind,
shock of the loss at
shock of the loss at Panipat, shock of the loss of his brother, shock of the loss of his son. And Madhavrao, and then he came down south, and Madhavrao then was the natural successor. But Raghunath Rao was the senior man in the family. Almost Madhavrao was, say, about 16. Raghunath Rao was about 26 or 27 that time, which is prime of health and prime of life. And so it was, he was the final, I mean, when he came to Pune and died in June 1761, till then his prestige was such that in spite of the loss at Panipat, nobody really entered the Maratha territory proper. Nobody came south of the Chambal. The Nizam was kind of getting his forces together, but he would not march towards Pune. Hyder Ali was trying to come to terms that here's an opportunity, because he was almost on the ropes. I mean, he was going to be extinguished just before Panipat, and now he found an opportunity to come back. So all these events were happening, and at this time, young Madhavrao was the heir apparent, and he was coming back to Pune. In Pune, 23rd of June, Nana Sahib dies on Parvati, and he advises Raghunath Rao to how to carry out the administration and so on. 14 days later, you find Madhavrao is appointed as the Peshwa. But after that, suddenly there is a loss of that prestige which the empire had is lost, and you find that invasions taking place from all around. From the south, you find that Hyder Ali is advancing, from Nizam is advancing Hyderabad to Bidar and further, and from the north you find Shujautara crossing the Chambal, coming down, the fort of Jhansi is lost, and even some Maratha soldiers, chiefs in the north, they change sides. Ganesh Sambhaji, one name which comes to mind. And generally you find that it appears as if this is the end of the empire. It's almost like it was an abyss, and it was difficult to come out of this kind of deep pit which they had found themselves in. And at such a time, the 16-year-old boy, with his ambitious mother, Gopika Bai, becomes the Peshwa. And Raghunath Rao kind of arrogates to himself the power of advising him and to carry out the tasks of the empire as the elder statesman in the family, which was resented not as much as Madhavrao himself, but by his mother. And that was the germ, I mean the seed kind of which started this internal domestic and naturally at the very top, you find within the very family of the Peshwa, Raghunath Rao is trying to get his way, and Gopika Bai is trying to tutor Madhavrao to go in a different direction. The courtiers started taking sides too. There were some people who were loyalists of Raghunath Rao, some who were on Nana Sahib and Madhavrao side. So the Darbar also began to divide vertically. In the midst of this invasions on all four sides, the divide at the very top was what was worrying, and there were, of course, internal disagreements and battles which led to the deterioration of the situation even further in the next 2 years.
But we see that even in that, Madhavrao was a very obedient and nephew, and he was very respectful towards Raghunath Rao. But we'll come to that a bit later. I would like to ask Dr. Gadgil, according to you, what were the, adding to what Dr. Kulkarni just said, what were the main challenges internally as well as externally that Madhavrao faced in his early years as Peshwa?
Yes, so apart from the challenges that Dr. Kulkarni has spoken about, particularly within the family affairs with the role of Raghunath Rao as well as Gopika Bai, you have a lot many challenges even within the Confederacy. So as we have been talking of in the earlier two sessions, there were a lot of feudal chiefs or sardars who were there, and they were binded together by the authority of the Peshwa. Both Bajirao as well as later on Nana Sahib had that mark of authority. And over here we have a 16-year-old. Along with that, you have two rival sets of advisors who are there. They have their own entrenched camps which are there in Pune. Now this not only led to divisions within the Peshwa's camp per se, but it also in a way gave wrong considerations to the other feudal chiefs. The Peshwa's authority was seen as withering away, and this would have eventually led to the entire downfall of the Marathas very rapidly. Now, as we know, that does not happen immediately. It does take its own time. It does take a few more decades for that to happen. But this was a major challenge. But the question was whether the Marathas will survive as a political unit or not. So it was not just the question about whether Madhavrao will survive in that position. It was the survival of the entire confederacy which was in question. Now, along with that, it was also the challenges that were emerging. So yes, you do have invasions threatening the Maratha territories in the north and the Deccan everywhere. But you also have the rise of new powers. In the last session, we talked about the rise of the English after Plassey. So this is also the time where you have the rise of the English, now not as a trading power, but with a potential to become a political power in the Indian subcontinent. And that is a way that leads after the Battle of Buxar in 1764. So you have the rise of the English, which was there in the east, which was perhaps the biggest challenge. And Madhavrao, in his letters when he was addressing to his chiefs in Delhi, also marks it out. You also have a major challenge that was emerging in the Deccan. That was the rise of Hyder Ali. You have the Vodaya dynasty, which had weakened considerably. An entire part is there, I'm sure we'll come to it later. You do have the rise of Hyder Ali and the rise of Mysore under Hyder Ali, which also became a challenge. So these were challenges as well on the outside, apart from the challenges which were there within the Confederacy. And again, it was always the Nizam who would be very keen to exploit the Marathas in a weaker position. and the Marathas undoubtedly after Panipat were in a weaker position.
So just before Panipat, I think both Nizam Ali and Hyder Ali had been suppressed. But like Dr. Kulkarni said, that after Nana Sahib Peshwa's death and the coming of a young Peshwa who didn't seem to have a lot of support from all sides, probably Nizam Ali was the first one who felt emboldened enough to make an aggression. Is that right, Dr. Kulkarni?
Around the time of Panipat, Nizam Ali did one more thing. He had not been officially designated as the Nizam by that time. His brother Salabat Jung was actually the Nizam. He imprisoned him. He found that he had the opportunity to do so, and within a few days he assumed all the powers as the de facto Nizam. And you find that this civil war in Pune, Raghunath Rao you find reaching out to the Nizam in certain circumstances, and sometimes advisors. No, he was opposed to the advisors who were appointed by Madhavrao, Baburao Fadnis and Trimbakrao Petri. These were the two advisors, the Karbharis or the Diwan of the Peshwa. And Raghunath Rao didn't want these two people as place. In that place he wanted Sakharam Bapu to take over from these places. So this kitch kept on going on. And suddenly Raghunath Rao would walk away from Pune, saying, I'm going to so and so place, I want to do some puja over there. And everybody used to go back and try to, appease him, he come back. So he said, okay, I'll come the next day. Then from there he'll go somewhere else. And so this was an invitation for the Nizam to also make the most while. And during this time there were 2 or 3 battles which took place. And in each of these battles, all the losses which the Nizam had sustained in the previous decade, from 1750 to 1761, in each battle, Raghunath Rao, he either summoned the Nizam for help or indirectly kind of took his Sardars to come that side. So every time he nibbled away at whatever the Marathas had gained. So, and at one battle actually at Alegao, which is near Pune, Madhavrao's army was weaker than Raghunath Rao, and he had already called the Nizam who was marching up to that place. So Madhavrao found that now there is going to be a battle between 2 sections of the Maratha army across the river. So he wrote to his mother that I thought it is best to avoid this battle and I will go and submit to my uncle. So he went to with very few people, went to Raghunath Rao's camp, put his head on his feet and said that I will do whatever you like. So from then on, Madhavrao became a kind of a virtual under house arrest, though technically he remained the Peshwa. And all his adherents, Trimbakrao Pethe, Baburao Fadnis, they all left him and they went to safe places looking after themselves because they knew if Raghunath Rao is in power, he'll take it out on all of these people. And that's what exactly began to happen. Like the Patwardhans had been given the fort of Miraj and a Saranjam around that period. The first thing that Raghunath Rao decided was to take back the fort of Miraj from them. And he marched with a big army to take back that fort. And the Govind Hari, who was the Patwardhan there, he made a very strong defense of that place. Almost for more than a month, that fort was defending itself against the entire might of the Maratha army, which had placed it under siege. If they blasted a hole in the wall at night, they used to make mud with a cloth around it and put it and seal those holes at night. And this went on for a month. Raghunath Rao himself came to the trenches and tried to inflict a final blow. He failed in that. Finally, some of the soldiers inside the fort, they said, now we have had enough. And therefore, Govind Hari Patwardhan had no choice but to submit. And so the fort of Miraj went to Raghunath Rao. But looking at all these things happening, the Nizam, he began outright invasion on the Peshwa's territory. And the man who was pushing the Nizam to do this was none other than his Diwan, who was Vitthal Sundar Parshurami. Now there is a famous story of 3.5 wise men of Maharashtra. So the Vitthal Sundar was one of the 3.5 wise men. One was Sakharam Bapu, one was Vitthal Sundar, third was one Diwan at Nagpur, Chorghade. And the half man, 3.5 is a very popular in Marathi usage, half man was Nana Fadnis. Now, and each of them had their own peak of their careers at different times, but in some of them have all been called Sadetin Shahani, or the 3.5 wise men of Maharashtra. And it is said that a half Shahana, who was Nana Fadnis, finally managed to put all these 3 down. So one of these Vitthal Sundar was actually, now there is a story about his falling out with Nana Sahib Peshwa, and why he went and joined the Nizam, and why he was so much against the Peshwa's part. He was initially a clerk with Nana Sahib, and one day he was not doing his job properly, he was sleeping on the job. So Nana Sahib, he was a Deshastha Yajurvedi Madhyam Din Brahmin. So Nana Sahib said, Madhyam Dinam Buddhihinam. You are a Madhyam Dinam, you have got no brains. So that insult was something which he could not bear. And he left the job and went out to the Nizam side. And it was his life's mission that I will bring down the Peshwa's this thing in some way or the other. And towards this he kept pushing Nizam Ali that you must extinguish this dynasty. And so Nizam Ali was the guiding force to push Nana Sahib and Nizam Ali towards these battles. And the final actually showdown, as to say, happened because the Nizam came marching towards Pune. On the way, destroyed the temples on the banks of the Godavari and the Pravara, a place called Toka. And then he came to Pune, and it was not expected that he will actually burn the city down. But a lot of Marathas chiefs who were on Madhavrao side, when they found that there was no safe place in the Maratha Empire, they had gone and joined the Nizam, like Gopalrao Patwardhan, Janoji Bhosle of Nagpur. These are prominent people who were actually fighting in the Nizam's army, and you find that 30,000-40,000 of the Nizam's army comprised of Marathas at that time. So when they came down marching on Nasik, they looted Nasik, then they came to Pune, they attacked Pune. Gopika Bai and Narayan Rao Peshwa was there, few further Peshwa. They were asked to go to Sumagarh and take care of themselves. And 2/3 of the houses of Pune were burnt down in 1763. At that time, Raghunath Rao and Madhavrao were near Hyderabad. And they burnt a few suburbs of the city, but they did not attack the main city. And when Raghunath Rao heard that this has happened, it was very difficult to stop him from going and attacking Nizam Ali. The man of very quick changes of temper. So on the one hand, he was looking at Nizam Ali as an ally. When he heard that Pune has been burnt, he had a total turnaround, and I must go and teach this fellow a lesson. And he started marching backwards. The monsoons came at that time, so many other people, without asking for leave, they just became AWOL, absent without leave, and went back to started their agricultural activity. So both the armies were depleted. At that time, the Nizam was heading back to Aurangabad, for which he had to cross the flooded Godavari at a place called Rakshas Bhuvan, which is just further down from the present dam at Paitan. And this is the opportunity which Madhavrao found. He sent feelers to Janoji Bhosle, promised him, I'll give you this, I'll give you this much territory, I'll give you this much money. You stay aloof, separate from the Nizam's army and go and stay somewhere else. Then he sent feelers to Gopal Rao that we'll give you back the fort of Miraj, we'll give you back your saranjams and so on. And he went home saying that I have to attend some religious ceremony, so I have to go. So he abandoned the Nizam. So finally you find that Nizam and Vitthal Sundar were the main people left, and a few other generals of his. And when the Maratha army reached near Rakshas Bhuvan, seeing the army, Nizam Ali with his artillery crossed the Godavari quickly and headed towards Aurangabad. While Vitthal Sundar with another few thousand people stayed to the south bank of Godavari, where they were attacked by Raghunath Rao. Now Madhavrao was still a de facto under some kind of house arrest. There were guards around him at that time. So when Raghunath Rao attacked this army, you find that at one place there is a description of his elephant surrounded by the Nizam's army, and the elephant is made to sit down, and had he actually said, he said, I want to get off the elephant, go on the horse. So his Mahout was telling him, please don't get off, if you get off now you will be arrested. So when they found the elephant is surrounded, Madhavrao told the people around him, what are you waiting for? You can see the elephant is surrounded, go and rescue him. So they said, what will I get for that? So he said, I'll give you this village in Jagir, I'll give you this. That was a kind of army we had at that time. It was not that a nationalistic army, you tell somebody go and fight. So then 3-4 people went and rescued the elephant. Within the Nizam's fold there were divisions. So one person of the Nizam's army fired at Vitthal Sundar himself and shot him. And then one of the people from Madhavrao army cut off his head. And with that, the Nizam was decisively beaten at Rakshas Bhuvan. In fact, on the Rakshas Bhuvan on the bank of the Godavari, you can still see the samadhi of Vitthal Sundar standing there. And then after he went back to Aurangabad, the Mallarao Holkar, in fact, Mallarao Holkar also had to be wooed to come here. Madhavrao himself had to go to his place and tell him that please come, I will give you the following places as your Jagir, and then he came and joined them. And so all these people, they crossed the Godavari and then they went across and they had a treaty with the Nizam. All that he had taken back. In fact, he had lost 60 lakhs of territory at Udgir, but here, and some of it had been returned. This time he had to return that entire 60 lakhs plus another 30 lakhs on top of that. So it was the biggest defeat of the Nizam in 1763. But Madhavrao, in spite of taking back this territory from the Nizam, he wanted to keep him as a friend. Because the reason for that, like everybody asked me why was it not extinguished, there was a permanent risk of Raghunath Rao joining up with the Nizam against Madhavrao. So he wanted to keep the Nizam on his side. Raghunath Rao went back to Nashik, and Nizam and Madhavrao had a leisurely, friendly meetings over a few days, where the Nizam was kind of convinced that if we both are together, it is a mutual win-win situation. And later events did prove that, because in 1763, there was no battle between the Marathas and the Nizam for the next 32 years, till 1795. So that was the longest period of peace you find between the Nizam's kingdom and the Marathas, and that gave Madhavrao time to look at the other parts as other enemies who were surrounding him from all sides. Because one of his borders was secured. He had made a lasting peace with the Nizam. Then he could turn his attention to Hyder Ali.
And also he gained the upper hand as well as far as his uncle was concerned. And
so his uncle wrote to Gopika Bai, that is Madhavrao's mother, that because he was rescued from the battle and Madhavrao himself took part in it, he said, "Amcha peksha Chiranjeev adhik zale," means my nephew has become more than me. And after that he said, "Now I will just go to my place in Nashik and I will do puja pat. I don't want all these worldly things. I'm now getting old. I'm not well." Actually, he was 27, but I'm now not really interested. So all that pretense was there. But in his heart of hearts, he didn't want to do that.
Dr. Gadgil, I would request you to add to what Dr. Kulkarni said about the significance of this battle at Rakshas Bhavan and how it reflected the fact that Madhavrao had actually become mature as a leader and the consequences of that victory at Rakshas Bhavan.
Undoubtedly. I think the Battle of Rakshas Bhavan is the point where we see Madhavrao emerging as an independent leader, as an independent ruler, where the influence of Raghunath Rao or Gopika Bai begins to obviously lessen day by day. Rakshas Bhavan becomes important not only because he neutralized the Nizam over here, we also see him as an excellent military commander. I think it has been pointed out by Dr. Kulkarni also in the book that this is a battle which is very similar to the way Bajirao fought at Palkhed against the Nizam, where you have the Nizam's army which was divided into two sides of the river banks, and how you have the attack which was made on one, and eventually them being surrounded and forced to negotiate for peace. So you have a similar situation, but obviously the battle was much more fought, so as to say, as opposed to Palkhed, which was more about the battle of movements. Again, the role of Madhavrao, the role of Huzurat, that is the elite cavalry under the command of Peshwa, in liberating, so as to say, a surrounded Raghuva, also played an important role in that. Raghunath Rao's role being diminished on one hand, he in a way felt that he was fortunate to be saved by his nephew. On the other hand, as has been marked out in the letter, he felt that his nephew has become independent and may not need his advice. So there is a bit of insecurity. The idea that he wants to go and take exile perhaps or retire from politics is again just out of desperation or perhaps wanting attention to himself. That people coming to him, perhaps the Peshwa himself coming to him and saying, "No, we need you, I require you to be in my life to guide you." So that is an equation perhaps at a psychological level that he was attempting to play. Because later on we realize that you have multiple demands throughout the career of Madhavrao that were made by Raghunath Rao, stating that give me a Jagir of these many lakh rupees, give me that fort, give me these many villages. And this is also what happened after Madhavrao's death, when Narayan Rao was brought in as the Peshwa. So Raghunath Rao's role as such does not get diminished. He still continues to be the troublemaker, but not to the extent that he was in the earlier years. his role definitely was reduced considerably. Madhavrao emerged in his own light. You do have respect which started coming from the other feudatory chiefs as well of the role that Madhavrao was playing. So Madhavrao was no longer the 16-year-old who had just come into office, who was not trained. It was Vishwasrao who was undergoing the training to eventually take up the robes of the Peshwa. So you have the respect both within the family, within the close circle. He was able to win back the close commanders that he had lost to the Nizam's camp. So over here we see a good commander, a good diplomat, a good administrator emerging, and that is what proved to be a litmus test for Madhavrao in his entire career, that set him on the path that he was eventually going to take for the next 7 to 8 years.
Dr. Kulkarni, Dr. Gadgil mentioned that Raghunath Rao kept making these demands from time to time, and among that you've mentioned that there's a letter that you have given in the book which says that he asked his nephew to give half the kingdom, and the answer that Madhavrao...
Actually, after the first campaign against Hyder Ali, when both of them, Madhavrao had actually brought Hyder Ali to his knees, because at a place called Bidnur, which is in the Western Ghats, and it's a very thick forest, so Hyder Ali took refuge there because the Maratha cavalry could not operate in those jungles. So Madhavrao himself led the army there. At different points he kept pushing back Hyder until finally he was at Bidnur. Bidnur today is called Nagara. Hyder renamed it as Hyder Nagara, and today it is just called Nagara. So it's a very strong fort with a lot of its own water supply, high in the hills, in middle thick forest. So when Madhavrao reached very close to that place, sometime before that, he was aware that Raghunath Rao was up to some mischief in Nasik. And leaving him alone in Nasik was, he could not go ahead with the campaign looking over his shoulder at what his uncle is doing. So he decided that he will call his uncle to the campaign against Hyder Ali. And his uncle came there, and then, as Colonel Briggs has written, who has written a big article on Madhavrao's letters that time. So he said the gentleman that he was, he offered Raghunath Rao the right to conduct the final negotiations with Hyder Ali. And with a few miles from Nagara, there's a place called Anantapur, where they signed a treaty of Anantapur, where, they got 32 lakh rupees of indemnity from Hyder and promises that these places you will not disturb. There are a lot of principalities within Karnataka, like Chitradur, Harpanhalli. These were places under Maratha control. You will not disturb these people because they are paying a tribute to the Marathas, and Marathas were protecting them. So all this was promised, and 32 lakh rupees. And then both Raghunath Rao, who it is said, by letting Hyder off the hook, there are many people at that time who felt that Hyder should be finished now. But by letting him off the hook, it was in future, if you see Raghunath Rao's career, he kept seeking help from Hyder Ali, from Nizam, because every time he came to the negotiating table, he used to offer them some tidbits in return, keeping them happy and kind of establishing some kind of a different level of contact with them. So when they both started coming back to Pune, I don't know if I marked that letter here, but it's a very interesting letter. They both, within a week of their coming back, Raghunath Rao began his demands of the 5 lakh.
226.
Okay. I started making his demands. I want to be so many forts you must give me, so many lakh rupees you should give me. In fact, we will divide the kingdom, was his. So the letter says, Srimanta Ubhayata Punyas Ale. They came to Pune. 8 दिवस झाल्यावर थोरले श्रीमंताने बोली घातली. So within 8 days, Raghunath Rao said, निम्मे राज्य वाटून द्यावे. Give me half the kingdom. So धाकटे श्रीमंताने उत्तर केले. Madhavrao replied, राज्य कोणाचे? Whose is the kingdom? आम्ही वाटणार कोण? Who am I to divide it? आमच्याने वाटवत नाही. सर्व राज्य तुमचेच आहे. You take everything. आम्ही 4 बारगीर तसे तुम्हाजवळ असो, तुम्ही सर्व करणे. He said, because he looked upon himself as a trustee of the empire. He did not say it is my kingdom, I can divide it, I can give it away. That was thing. Then he wrote another letter to an assistant aide of Raghunath Rao, which is again a very letter at around the same time. And in Marathi it's very powerful. He says that he daulat moti. Daulat is a word for kingdom. ही दौलत मोठी, या दौलते सर्व लहान मोठ्याने अनुकूल असून जेणेकरून दौलत नीट होईल तेच सर्वांनी करावे. Everybody should together make sure that this kingdom runs smoothly. ते एकीकडे राहून दौलत दोहो जागा करावी हे तीर्थ स्वरूपांचे मानस. Leaving that aside, you want to divide the kingdom and rule from two different places what he wants. त्यास आम्हास काही करणे नाही. In that case, I don't want to do anything. कारण की दौलत पहिल्यापासून एकानेच करावी. This kingdom has always been ruled by only one person. आणि वरकडाचा भार करणाऱ्यावर असावा त्याप्रमाणे चालत आले आहे. आता वडिलांचे मानस की वडील म्हणजे सिनियर हिज फील्स दॅट आम्हास गुजरात द्यावी, सर्व किल्ल्याचा बंदोबस्त आम्हीच करू, आय विल लुक आफ्टर द फोर्ट्स, गिव्ह मी गुजरात. तर आम्हास तसे काही करणे नाही, का की अशाने दौलत चालणार नाही. दोहो जागा दौलत झाल्याने लौकिक वाईट. इफ दिस डिव्हिजन टेक्स प्लेस, you cannot rule from two different power centers, and this will spoil my reputation more than anything. Laukik will be bad, so let the senior do everything. Ami swastha bhalte jage basu, I will sit somewhere else. So this is what he told Raghunath Rao, which eventually Raghunath Rao had to take a small few forts around the Nasik region and retire to Nasik, where he built a house called Anandvalli. Now around this time Raghunath Rao also, this is second marriage with Anandi Bai, the famous Anandi Bai. First marriage, he had two sons who died in infancy. Anandi Bai also, he had two sons who died in infancy. One died very early. Second died when Raghunath Rao was playing with him. He threw him in the air and he fell down and died. So he was very disheartened that I'm asking for the kingdom, but I don't have a son to pass it on to. So around this time, this man goes and adopts a son from a chief of Burhanpur. He's surnamed Buskute. And when Madhavrao hears of this, that an adoption has been done by Raghunath Rao, he is furious, because he says that not only has he adopted a son, but he's adopted from a different gotra. Now gotra was a very big thing those days. You could not marry somebody from the same gotra, but you had to adopt somebody from the same gotra. Gotra meaning the original rishi from which your entire family has started. So everybody's got that gotra, and if you want to marry somebody, it should not be from your gotra, because it's consanguineous marriage. But as far as adoption is concerned, it must he says that you have adopted a son from some other gotra, he is not allowed to come into my darbar. And that was the final straw of the relationship between.
I was about to ask you that till how long did he take that conciliatory approach and try to pacify his uncle, and finally?
There were a couple of more incidents in between which I did not mention. One was when the English came down to Pune. The English, there was a very mischievous man called Thomas Mostyn. So this guy, for the first time he had come in 1759. This is the second time he comes here in 1766-67. And his assistant is a man called Brougham. Now these guys stayed in Pune for 2 months. By that time Hyder Ali was fighting with the English in Chennai along with the Nizam. And all three of them were sending their wakils to Pune, saying which side the Peshwa is going to take. So Mostyn came from Bombay to find out what is the Peshwa's mind, and he could not really gauge what the Peshwa is thinking. And Brougham went to Nasik and offered Raghunath Rao that the English will do whatever you want. Tell us what exactly. So Raghunath Rao didn't understand, where are these English coming from? I mean, what help are they going to give me? So he dismissed him after that. But Brougham gives a full report. He's got so many cannons, he's got so many elephants, so many horses at his place in Nasik. What is Madhavrau's darbar like? Mostyn writes back. And in the meanwhile, Hyder Ali had been defeated by the English, so the need for Madhavrau's help was over. So they went back to Bombay. So during that time also he found that Raghunath Rao was hobnobbing with him. And then this adoption of another child was the third thing which happened in 1767-68. And he found Madhavrao decides that he will now go and finally resolve this problem of his uncle. And he takes a large army and he goes to a fort called Dhodap, which is where Raghunath Rao, on the base of the fort, is camping. And when Madhavrao comes, Raghunath Rao goes and climbs the fort. The fort is a very high fort actually, it's over 4,800 feet high. And at the base of the fort, all the people who are fighting who are on Raghunath Rao's side, they are defeated, some are even killed. And then Raghunath Rao has said that you come down the fort. So he sends letters, the original letters actually are in London, which I have translated and put here, where he says that okay, we should meet each other honorably. In public it should not look as if something is wrong, and I have sent you some narangis and I have sent you some plantains. So that kind of letters have come from Raghunath Rao. So then when Madhavrau's camp he comes, he's put him on the same elephant, he gives him his seat to sit on the elephant, but he insists that you must come and stay in Pune. you cannot stay in Nasik. So in 1768, Raghunath Rao is finally brought and kept as a kind of under house arrest in the Shaniwar Ward. And from 1768, for the next 4 years, you find this Raghunath Rao's problem, which Madhavrao was facing before that, for the first 8 years of his reign, that is kind of capped for the time being.
There was this other thing in between all these major events and battles. There was this small, or maybe not so small, problem of the pretender coming up all the time of a man. So, Dr. Gadgil, would you?
The
pretender,
Sadashirao. The question about Sadashirao Bhau's death was not entirely accepted by a few members of the Peshwa's family as well. There were uncertainties whether Bhau had died, though there are contemporary reports that Sadashirao Bhau did die towards the ending part of the Third Battle of Panipat. There were a few pretensions which were made by individuals immediately after that. But it was in the mid-1760s, in 1764 or 65, that you have one fakir from central India who started descending. He got a large number of followers. He was also able to, involve people in an army. So there were close to around, I think, 2,000 camp followers which were there. And he came pretending that he was Sadashirao Bhau. And that was to such a great extent that you have the Peshwa also being forced to see and investigate whether he was the actual Sadashirao Bhau, or you have another individual trying to pretend that he is Bhau and trying to take back some position or some administrative benefit from the Maratha Confederacy. The story goes that you have the pretender who was eventually brought to Pune. It was Bajirao's sister who was called about, Anutai, I think, who was called about to actually verify whether that is Sadashirao Bhau or another pretender. And even she could not recognize it in the first instance after interacting briefly with him. So Dr. Kulkarni has a vivid episode which has been marked out. He stayed for I think about a month and a half or two, and eventually towards the end of that period, Anutai came to the conclusion that this is not Bhau. So you have many such episodes, many such anecdotes, or even with Raghunath Rao, the love he was a man of passions, I think, driven by emotions, to the extent that he was telling about the story of Pune being burned by Nizam and him wanting. In fact, you also have a detail in which it is stated that Raghunath Rao is furious at his generals deserting the Peshwa and saying just that, just like the generals deserted Sadashirao Bhau on the battlefields of Panipat, you have deserted the Peshwa and the Marathas once again. So you have, many such anecdotes which are filled. And this pretender is one of the most famous anecdotes which comes from 1760s, and he could perhaps stay for 2 long months pretending to be Bhau with close family members of the Peshwa has something to give.
Actually, this pretender was a man. It was later on discovered, of course. They found a man sitting under a tree somewhere near Narwar in the Madhya Pradesh, today's Madhya Pradesh. And some people passing by him felt that he looks like Sadashirao Bhau. So there is a local Mahant. A Mahant was a Naga Sadhu who was there in that place. So they go and tell that Mahant that Sadashirao Bhau is sitting under that tree. So one of them comes and says that if you are Bhau, why don't you declare yourself as Bhau? So he says, I'm not Bhau. Then he takes him to his mutt and keeps him there for a few days. And he tries to build him up. He tries to give him all the insignia of office. And he tries to tell people that Bhau is alive and he is here. And then all the Maratha chiefs in the Malwa region, they start going and visiting him to check. And some of them will write back to Pune that yes, we have met him and he looks very authentic. But then Pune people say, but unless we see a letter written in his hand, how do we say that he is really Sadashirao Bhau or not? And he doesn't speak Marathi, he speaks only Hindustani. So this, if you look at it today, it seems so strange. And then he's told, okay, you must write a letter in Marathi. So the next day he said, okay, I'll write it tomorrow. And then instead of writing it, he goes for a shikar. And he goes to some other kingdom where he is felicitated and he's given some awards and he's given a shirpage and an elephant. So he's moving around with the Peshwa's flag. He even makes a Peshwa's flag with a Zari Patka there. He's sitting on the elephant, carrying with 3,000 to 4,000 people, going from place to place, accepting awards from everybody. Madhavrao was in a campaign against Hyder Ali in the south, and when he hears about this, in a letter he writes, "He Bhausahebanchi reet nave." This is not the way of Bhausaheb to come in this manner. And he said, but anyway, investigate this guy and bring him here. So he's somewhere near Nandurbar in North Maharashtra, where after a couple of skirmishes, he is arrested and brought to Pune. And there, of course, Anubai keeps him for 2-3 weeks to assess whether he is the real Sadashirao, Bhau, or the pretender. Then she declares the pretender. Then he's put in the main chowk of Pune, the Budhwar chowk. He's made to stand there from morning to evening, so anybody in the public can come and see him and see for themselves and satisfy themselves this is not Sadashirao. And then he's taken to Parvati, where the Chief Justice of the Marathas, Ram Shastri, he interrogates him along with a whole lot of other Pandits. And there was a very important oath among the Marathas those days called the Bel Bhandar. The bale and the leaves which are offered to Shiva. And Bhandara is what is given, for example, in Jejuri, Mallar, Jai Mallar, when you say you have those yellow turmeric powder. So that Bel and Bhandar, when you take an oath on Bel and Bhandar, it's supposed to be the most pious oath that a Hindu can take. So Ram Shastri puts that Bel Bhandar in front of him and he says, you must tell the truth of who you actually are. So then he says that I am actually from Kannauj and I had a tiff with my brothers and so I left home and came here. And then people started telling me that you look like Bhau. And then, though I was protesting, they declared I'm Bhau and they started surrounding me with people started gathering around me. And therefore I had to take this situation, I landed up in this situation. So then he was put in a prison in the fort of Ghangad. And then they kept transferring him to different prisons. Now this story of the pretender is as far as this book is concerned. There is more to come in the next book. Because the pretender story doesn't end here. From 1765 it extends till 76-77. And there's a famous Marathi play on this written by N.C. Kelkar called Totayache Bandar. He actually rebels. He escapes from a prison 10 years down the line from the fort of Ratnagiri. Again the Ratnagiri Killedar, the man who was holding that fort, is a man named Paranspe. He's convinced that this man is Bhau after 10 years in prison. And he allows him to go. And that time the first Anglo-Maratha war is going on. And this guy again collects a huge army. And he's asked for help from Raghova Dada, Raghunatha, who was that time with the English. And finally, when he's going by boat towards Bombay, he's on the way, Raghuji Agre captures him and brings him to Pune. And that time he's finally put to death. So that happened in 1776. The popular way of killing somebody in those days for such offences was, in the letters it said Dotski Marli. These were tent-pegging hammers were used. The man was first put up on a donkey and shaved off head. And he was taken around the whole city facing backwards. And then when he finishes that thing, either a donkey or a elephant or a camel or something, and then he's pushed off that camel, and the tent-pegging hammer is used to hit his skull, smashed it, and he's killed in that way. So this is the way this man finally meets his end, but 4 years after Madhavrao's period is over.
Well, coming back to Madhavrao's main foe, Hyder Ali, I would like to ask Dr. Gadgil. Dr. Kulkarni calls him slippery customer. So,
As a military leader, I have the highest regard for Hyder Ali. He was one of the foremost military leaders of his time. But
the thing is, he kept coming back. He was not completely.
Basically, Hyder Ali was not only the foremost military leader of his time, but he was also a statesman, unlike his son. Unfortunately, his son was not a statesman. But that's later.
So I wanted to ask Dr. Gadgil about which were the main battles that Madhavrao and Hyder Ali fought, and yet he was not completely exterminated. Like I said, he kept coming back till almost the very end of Madhavrao's reign as Peshwa. So the significance of those battles, and I think they occupied most of the time of Madhavrao as Peshwa. So what was it about Hyder Ali and his strategy, and he could keep coming back, whether he was emboldened by the fact that there were fissures in the family and how Raghava Dada kept making overtures, whether it was that or whether it was, what were the factors which allowed him to come back time and again?
if it was perhaps Nizamul Mulk was the preoccupation during Bajirao's time, Madhavrao, I think, had a great adversary in the form of Hyder Ali. Now, Hyder Ali's rise is a meteoric one. From a petty officer, eventually he becomes a virtual ruler of the Mysore state. The Vodayars were mere puppets in his hands. You do have him being a slippery customer, as has been remarked. And Raghunath Rao definitely did have a role to play here and there to ensure that he slips from the grasp of the Marathas. But definitely you do have the Marathas going after Hyder Ali with great pursuit in the second half of the 1760s. It is after Rakshasgarh, after a kind of peace is established with the Nizam, that you have the entire focus which shifts to the south. One was perhaps to ensure that the Maratha dominance over the south was re-established. Now after Panipat, we see the way you have the northern chiefs who are beginning to assert their independence, beginning to not obey the Maratha commands, so as to say. You similarly have the Nizam trying to do that. Rakshas Bhawan puts a halt to that. Hyder Ali also starts making advances, taking territories from the Marathas, also ensuring that he becomes a potential threat to the Marathas in the future. So Madhavrao was not just dealing with a power that was trying, taking away parts of its territories, but he was also dealing with a power that may become a potential rival in the nearby future. He did realize that Hyder Ali was a good general on the field. He did have potential to become a major power in southern India. Along with that, you also have Madhavrao, who is in his approach, in his religious social approach, a very conservative person. The idea of establishing Hinduism or safeguarding the Hindu interest is also very close to Madhavrao's perspective. So the displacing of many of the Hindu chieftains, which happens after the rise of Hyder Ali, the treatment to the Vodayar family, something that again we see during this time period, or the attacks on Hindu places of worship, which also has said to have upsetted Madhavrao. So these were also the possible motives for Madhavrao to interfere in the southern Indian affairs and go against Hyder Ali to a considerable extent. By Battle of Moti Talao, I think stands out. It is over here that you have Hyder Ali being finally put into his place. But Hyder Ali, again, as Dr. Kulkarni said, was a genius when it came to military affairs. Now, this was perhaps one of the most difficult times for Hyder Ali. He was fighting against the English. You have the Marathas who were fighting against Hyder Ali. And at the same time, you also have the Nizam who was approaching the Mysore state. So you do have Hyder Ali still surviving all that. The Mysore state survives all that. So it is, in a way, a remarkable achievement for Hyder Ali as a statesman that he ensured the survival of his dynasty or his rule and the rule of Mysore too. Though he was defeated, he did surrender many territories. Eventually, in the peace that was also made with Madhavrao, Dr. Kulkarni has also pointed out there were 11 clauses, and I think 3 clauses dealt with these religious ideas, that how you have the temples which will be protected, how the Hindus will not be harmed, and so on, that donations and charities will continue to the temple and other institutions. So you not only have a political motive or a military motive, you also have a religious motive. And it was not Madhavrao per se who was leading the battles in the later half. It was more his feudatory chiefs. And again, in this time period, we see a lot many differences within the feudatory chiefs, which also that became another headache for Madhavrao to deal with. So you have all these things which were going on, and this is also the time when English were beginning to carve their way up from the southern Indian region. Mysore, Anglo-Mysore, this has begun what is called as the Anglo-Mysore Wars. So you have the Bengal region which was already conquered, and now you have the English rise which is also there in the south. So therefore, again, perhaps Madhavrao wanted to strengthen his southern frontiers to expand and have a Maratha stronghold over there. There's perhaps an argument that can be made.
One major motive which Madhavrao had in fighting with Hyder Ali was that in 1719, the Mughal emperor of that time had given the right to collect Chauthai of the 6.5 subas of the Deccan. which was a right which the Marathas kept asserting, that all their invasions in the south were to assert that right to collect the Chauthai in the south. Second thing is that when Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj had gone to the south, he had gone all the way to Tanjavur, on the northern bank of the Kaveri, and all those regions which were captured, even north of Bangalore. Bangalore, of course, was Shahaji Raja's Jagir once upon a time. So these areas were considered by the Marathas as the Swarajya of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, and they accepted that this is our territory. And Nanasaheb Peshwa had succeeded in capturing all these territories. In fact, there is a letter in his time that the Maratha army bathed in the Bay of Bengal. So he had gone all the way up to Arcot and captured all those places. Kurnool, Kadapa, Hoskote, all these places were captured by them around Bangalore. So this area which the Marathas considered the Swarajya, from where they did not take south. The south was taken in the areas which were not the Swarajya. So they believed that this Swarajya was usurped by Hyder Ali and they had to get it back. And before Hyder Ali came on, the state of Mysore was giving a regular south to the Marathas, which Hyder Ali put a stop to, and therefore this conflict arose because he would not accept the Marathas as the overlords of the Mysore state. And of course the other reasons were very pertinent, that there were religious causes for which Hyder Ali's operation in Coorg, for example, on the Malabar coast where he oppressed the Nayars. And so these were very valid reasons for people to rise up against him at that time. So that was also another important.
If I can just add this as something which he mentions as well, that when the Marathas called Hyder Ali as an usurper and did not respect him, you do have a letter that was written by Hyder Ali saying that he is just imitating what the Peshwas had done. So, in a way, over here, again, you have the statesman-like quality which comes out.
There was a very intelligent Vakil of Hyder Ali used to come to negotiate with Madhavrao. So once when he was negotiating with him, Madhavrao did not talk to him, he told him talk to Goparao Patwardhan. So he said that we will follow what was decided at Bidnur. So he said, Bidnur we negotiated with the king of Mysore, we didn't negotiate with you. And what has happened to him? What has happened to the king? So it's this is actually Colonel Wilkes, an English historian who has written this episode. And then Appaji Ram, without looking at the Peshwa, said that we are just following the example of our superiors. So which was a taunt that the Chhatrapati is powerless and the Peshwas got all the powers. But later commentators like Hayavadna Rao, who's written a masterly account of the history of Mysore in 3 volumes, he says such ribaldry and such kind of behavior was not tolerated in them, and especially in the court of Madhavrao. And no Vakil could have dared to say such a thing in front of the Peshwa at that time. Because he's a very stern person, and there are plenty of examples. The way he caned Gangoba Tatya, Chandrachud, because he was when he was supporting Raghunath Rao, and he was captured and brought to Pune, he was told that you must pay an indemnity of 29.5 lakh rupees immediately. When 2 months had passed and not a single rupee had been realized, Gangoba Tatya Chandrachud along with his brother-in-law, they were all brought to the Darbar and they were asked questions of why have you not remitted any money so far. So they did not give any satisfactory answers, they kind of tried to avoid it, tried to take it very casually. The Peshwa was so infuriated with this behavior that he took a cane in his own hand and he caned these 3 people, counting the canes. One chap was caned 300 times till blood was flying from all over his body. Gangoba Tatya was a very senior man who had fought with Mallara Holkar for 25 years and he was his divan. This man was personally whipped by the Peshwa himself, which was something which was very unbecoming of a prime minister or a Peshwa to do in the open darbar. So that is, and he put the fear of God in his chiefs. I mean, the reason he could take the entire Maratha chiefs, powerful chiefs, and make them obey him, because obey what he says, is because his own personality was such that first thing, probity, he never took anything for himself. There are many examples of that. Of his probity is ways to muster the troops, make sure that every contingent brings the number of troops. Whenever you go in a campaign, at every halt, they were mustered. Have you brought 6,000 people or not? If they were not, they were penalized. Their accounts, the Patwardhan letters are replete with examples of saying that please keep these letters of mine separately, because he is not just asking for accounts, he is asking the full rumal The full rumal means the entire bundle of papers is asking for them. So don't even keep my letter next to it, which I'm cautioning you. That is how strictly the accounts are being conducted for all the chiefs. And the chiefs were terrified of this kind of a thing.
There's this interesting
accountability which he held.
thing which you have mentioned where Parvati Bai Sadashirao was.
So within his own family, in fact, Parvati Bai was the widow of Sadashirao who kept wearing the insignia of a married woman because she believed that her husband was still alive, which probably boosted this Totia business. So she said, I want to see my jewelry. Now the jewelry was kept in the Jamdar Khana on Sumaghat Fort. So when Madhavrao was away on a campaign, Nana Fadnis is told that I want to see the ornament. So he gets the ornament to show it to Parvati Bai. And then Madhavrao writes to him that when I have told you specifically the jewelry is not to be brought down from the fort to show to my aunt, why was it brought down? Now he says, you tell her that it is my order that they have to be returned to the fort. You have seen them, now return it. And this is the way to tackle my aunt. He says that also in the end. Or his own wife, when he's away on a campaign, she asked Nana Fadnis, I want some beetle leaves and some tuna and all these things. So Nana Fadnis tells her, I mean, much is made of Rama Madhav, all these novels which you read are about Ramabai and Madhavrao. Now you know where Ramabai stands in the scheme of things in Madhavrao's time when Nana Fadnis tells her that when her husband is away, why do you need to paint your lips with palm? So that is the kind of strictness which he followed.
Yes. Well, while all these events were happening in the south, a lot was happening in the east with the British East India Company and the ambitions of Shuja and whatever Mir Qasim was doing. So while these events were happening, what was actually happening in the north and the east, and which would later have consequences for the Marathas?
Actually, after Panipat, you find that Delhi is more or less under the control of Najib-ud-Dawla, and the Marathas are not able to go there. The Jat ruler Surajmal Jat challenges Najib-ud-Dawla, and in a trivial battle near the Hindon river on the east of Delhi, he is killed. His son Jawahar Singh takes over after him, and because Surajmal was a very prudent ruler, he had accumulated a lot of treasure. The Jat army was one of the strongest armies at that time in North India. So the Jat army was a major block for the march of Marathas north of the Chambal and to reach Delhi. So at that time, going to Delhi was not on the cards. In fact, you find Shuja-ud-Dawla coming down south and taking place like Jhansi. Now in Bengal, when Mir Jafar is deposed and Mir Qasim is brought in his place, Mir Jafar's son dies because lightning falls on him and he is killed, and that depresses the old man so much that he is not able to do any administration. So his son-in-law Mir Qasim is made the Nawab. Now Mir Qasim is a very different kind of a person from Mir Jafar, and I think history has been a little unjust to this man, because what he did is, he said that if you are giving preferential treatment to the English traders, then I will stop taking taxes from everybody. English need not pay tax, but even the Indians will not pay taxes. So the advantage which the British had on trade in Bengal, that was lost. Now which the British didn't like. And progressively he started building up his army along proper infantry drill lines like the English had. He shifted his capital from Murshidabad to Mongir in Bihar, and gradually began to be his own man. And so the English officers used to come to Patna, he used to tell him, I don't like this chap, take him away. And the Governor General was Vansittart at that time, Clive had gone back to England. He had to change those guys. So in this way, one by one, he started getting his way. And then one day he exceeded his this thing, in which he captures a lot of British soldiers and officers at Patna. And the Jagat Seth, who were the bankers of Bengal, and he said that these are the guys who are sponsoring all English activities against me. And then the famous Patna massacre of 1763 takes place, where all these English prisoners are massacred. There were 3 surgeons among those people, 3 doctors, English doctors, 2 of who are killed, one of who escapes and goes back. And this guy has written a nice diary, and this diary is how all the events unfolded. Now this was a point of no return from Mir Qasim, and the English had to send an army. Now it must be remembered that each and every army which the East India Company said was led by officers and men from the British Army. So all this hoax about the company winning the empire was totally. The Battle of Buxar, which took place later on, Shuja-ud-Dawla tried to encroach onto Bihar. He went and attacked Patna, he was rebuffed from there. And 2-3 times Shah Alam himself, who wanted to take Bengal and Bihar, he was defeated. The very next day after Panipat, he is defeated in Bihar. So these three people come together. Mir Qasim, who had a lot of money and an army. Shuja-ud-Dawla, Nawab of Awadh, who wanted to spread his wings in the east. And Shah Alam, who wanted to capture the Bengal province, get some money from it, and then march back to Delhi to recover his father's throne. So these three people, when they came together, they had differences among themselves also. Like Mir Qasim's treasure was a sore point for Shuja-ud-Dawla. So before Buxar, he sends people, attacks him, and takes away his treasure and puts him in prison. Now Shah Alam, Shuja-ud-Dawla doesn't like, because he carries on the pretense of being an emperor, and he doesn't want him in his territory. So he keeps Shah Alam behind. Mir Qasim is let off just a day before the Battle of Buxar. And gradually from Bengal, a series of battles are fought between the English and Mir Qasim's forces. And finally, the English advanced to Buxar. At Buxar, the British army is a very small army, about 3,000 people, versus a huge army by Shuja-ud-Dawla. And the English army again is led by Major Munro, who is a Scottish person from the British army, who is called from, the regiments are also mentioned, 89, His Majesty's regiments and so on. They are called from Bombay to lead the battle. And when he reaches there, he doesn't want to fight that day, so they stop that day, they don't fight. And next day, Shuja-ud-Dawla comes forth to attack the British army, and the British army is pushed back. The entire left wing of the British army is pushed back, and the Mughaliya soldiers of Shuja-ud-Dawla actually reach the back of the British army, which is a sign that the enemy has been encircled on all sides. Now these foolish people, when they go to the back of the British army, instead of attacking them from the back and the front and the flanks, they go and start looting the baggage of the English. Now naturally that advantage which they had gained had lost. In that much time, the English attack the left wing of Shuja-ud-Dawla, and that left wing is defeated because it is a weak man sitting there, Beni Ram, Raja Beni Ram. So he flees from there. 2-3 of the chiefs are killed, and suddenly there is a flight of 30,000 soldiers who are running across there's a river there called Thodar Nala, where hundreds of people are dead while crossing that Nala which flows into the Ganges. There's a narrow bridge there which Shuja crosses and goes on the other side. The English commentators who took over his camp the next day, they have got a comment about Shuja. The only wise thing Shuja did that day was they destroyed the bridge after crossing it. So the English could not chase him. So that defeat at Buxar was very decisive. And the day Buxar was won, Robert Clive returned from England. And within a few months he had come to Allahabad, where in the fort of Allahabad on a dining table they put a cloth and an awning. And there he was, Shah Alam was asked to give the Diwani of Bengal and Bihar to the English. And that is how the revenue management of these two provinces fell into English hands. So they had, and then they took Banaras. So Banaras and Prayag or Allahabad, which were the two places the Marathas had aspired for a very long time, because of this battle of Buxar, which these three incompetent generals fought, fell into the hands of the English.
So, how did the Marathas then claw their way back up the north? Dr. Gadgil, could you elaborate on that? How did they finally regain the regions which they had lost after the Battle of Panipat?
One, after subduing Hyder Ali in the south completely, and on the other hand, in the eastern part, as Dr. Kulkarni just narrated, the downfall, or in a way a decisive victory which the English won over these three rulers, Shah Alam, Shuja-ud-Dawla and Mir Qasim. You do have the path to Delhi, which was in a way opening up. Just to add a bit, I think Dr. Kulkarni spoke about the Patna massacre, and it was a surgeon's diary which changed the course of events. So perhaps it is another surgeon's diary which is changing the course of events over here as well. Now with the weakness of the Awadh state coming up, the Rohillas losing Najib, and after Najib-ud-Dawla again there was a war within, you have sons competing. So you have a void that was there. Jawahar Singh was still strong, the Jats was still strong. But the Marathas in this manner tried to claw their way back through the central regions of Madhya Pradesh, and eventually through UP try to get back to Delhi. Now, even within Delhi, you do have a lot many negotiations which were going on. Over here as well, we see a lot many differences of opinion which come within the Maratha chiefs. And Madhavrao, because of his illness, is not able to move out of Pune much. We have letters after letters which have been carefully documented, to his chiefs, that it has been 22 months, it has been 24 months, and yet there is no clear sign of victory which is there over Delhi. Shah Alam II at the same time wanted desperately to return back to Delhi. You have negotiations with the English which were going on after the treaties of Allahabad. It was actually made a mere pensioner of the East India Company, as we all know. So he's trying to negotiate his way back to Delhi by writing letters to the English emperor, to the English governors in India, that help me back, take the Rohillas are there, but if the English troops accompany him, he can take back Delhi. A part of his family was still there in the Red Fort. So, and there was a fear that the Sikhs may attack. The Sikhs had attacked Delhi. Najib was able to push them back, but in case in future they do. He's also trying to negotiate a way with the Sikhs. You do have a couple of Sikh Sardars who approach Shah Alam II, but eventually it was the Marathas that stated that yes, we will help you find a way back to Delhi. Yeah, but there are again considerations. So you have the details of it. The figures may go wrong here and there, but 15 lakhs, once you enter Delhi, 25 lakhs or so, once you're back into the Red Fort, etc. So you have fees that will have to be paid. Along with that, Wazir you can name after returning back as the emperor in the Red Fort, but all the other appointments in the ministries will be done on the Maratha advice. So particularly Mir Bakshi, who was the paymaster general of the Mughal armed forces. So all these appointments will be done by us. And even when in Delhi, you do have still the Rohillas who are creating troubles. Shukratal is again fortified, not entirely, but mud fortifications others. You still have the differences between the Sindhiyas and the Holkars which surface, because the Holkars were traditionally closer to Najib-ud-Dawla, and you have all those equations which are there. So even after Delhi is taken back, that is another problem which is there. You do have eventually a Maratha campaign against the Rohillas. The Rohillas were defeated, undoubtedly so. And you do have Madhavrao resurrecting the Maratha Empire once more. It has been said that the Marathas rose like a phoenix at this time, that the plains of Panipat had ensured that the Marathas' presence and the dominance of the North Indian plains was wiped off. There was a vacuum that was created. Abdali had returned back to Afghanistan. Najib was controlling the Delhi affairs. There was no major power in North India. The East India Company, after Buxar perhaps, was trying to fill that void. But the Marathas in a way prevented it from happening in the immediate future. They were the ones who put that plug perhaps for a few more years for the English to truly rise as the dominating empire on the North Indian plains. In fact, you also have letters which have been mentioned in the book, where Madhavrao is constantly telling his generals in the north to keep a close eye on the English, that the Firangis should not come back. The Firangis are the ones who have to be looked after, that their interests in the north have to be looked after. So it is all these circumstances playing out when you have the Marathas coming back, and you have a true dominance again being achieved. So the Maratha supremacy over the Indian subcontinent, which was there perhaps after Udgir, right from Atak te Katak, as I said, from the Atak to Katak, which was there during Nana Sahib's time, it's established by 1759-1760, was again re-established when you have the Maratha Empire now stretching from the foothills of the Himalayas right down till the south. So the Maratha Confederacy was undoubtedly rescued, and perhaps not only rescued, it was also resurrected, albeit for a short time period, as we know.
Actually, in the south, of course, after the Battle of Moti Tala, which took place in 1771, where Trimbakrao Pethe fought that battle because Madhavrao was not well, and Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan were cornered to such an extent that they had to flee from the battlefield. This battle was just about 20 kilometers from Srirangapatnam, which is the capital. They had to flee from the battlefield dressed as beggars, differently on different horses, And those days nobody knew what Hyder Ali looked like. So Marathas captured somebody thinking that he's Hyder Ali, and for 2 days they were interrogating him. In the meanwhile, Hyder Ali reached back into Seringapatam. Then they discovered this actually was a close aide of Hyder Ali who was impersonating him. So in 1771 they had reached there. February 1771 Delhi was recaptured, and Mahatma Shinde invited Shah Alam to come back and occupy the throne, which he did on the 6th of January 1772. Now, after all these things had been done, the money was promised by the emperor, but when he came to Delhi, he said, I don't have money. So they had to make another campaign to Pathargarh, which was Najib-ud-Dawla's stronghold, where the combined armies went, they attacked Najib's capital, Pathargarh was taken, and a huge amount of treasure was found there, which was divided between Shah Alam and the Marathas. Many women who were taken at Panipat were rescued at that time from the fort of Pathargarh. And Madhavrao, sitting in Pune, was aware that the English are the real people to fear. So he writes to his chiefs that the English were strong with the king. They have been planning to bring the Padshah to Delhi for 5 to 7 years. If they wanted to bring him to Delhi, it was not as if they were wanting in strength. They would have. But they are soldiers of the seas. They do not have so much courage. Hence they told the Padshah not to go to Delhi. The Padshah didn't listen to them, he came. In this sense, the Padshah behaved according to our wishes, and we should encourage this behavior. The idea was always to control the Padshah and work through him. Do not let the English enter Delhi, he writes to his 4 chiefs in Delhi. Do not let the English enter Delhi. Once they get in, they will be difficult to uproot. Now, there's a typical Marathi word which he uses in the letter, difficult to uproot. Ukharnar nahi. Once they settle in Delhi, it will be difficult to remove them from Ukharnar nahi. That's the word he uses. And of all the topicers, the English have raised their head. Bengal, Calcutta, Masulipatam to Surat, they have brought the ports under their control. In the Karnataka, the English and Muhammad Ali of Arcot have occupied the Pine Ghat. Pine Ghat is the plains of Tamil Nadu. Like Mumbai, they have made Surat theirs. If they enter Delhi, the Padshah will be rendered subordinate to them. That happened in 1803 eventually, when Shah Alam went and welcomed General Lake and said, I am now, you please look after me and my family. It will be very difficult then. The English is on the rise. Nobody, including Shuja-ud-Dawla, is happy about it. Therefore, getting the Amirs on your side, mending the divide in our Sardars. After uniting, act to ensure that the English retreat. The English have taken Bengal from the Padshah in writing. With clever devices, something can be done about getting it released. For now, without allowing them to enter Delhi, they should return after seeing the Padshah. Managing the Padshah, placing the Padshah under our heavy favors, you should energetically carry out all necessary acts. Strategizing, you should by any means make one sit down, order another to stand up, and the full force of our power should fall on them. Such a time has come. So I've named this chapter as Such a Time Has Come. Towards this, whatever is needed with strength should be done. So this was a very clear thinking on the part of the Peshwa sitting in Pune, that this is the future which might happen if you don't take care now.
And with his failing health, one of the most important things that he did was to write his will, which you have included in the appendices. Something about that, and then we'll...
He knew that his work is not finished. He knew, though he had captured Delhi and right from Delhi to Seringapatam, from Gujarat to parts Orissa, the Marathas were in control. He knew his job was not complete, and therefore he had to perforce hand over certain responsibilities to his kind of executors of his will, if you say, which was Nana Fadnis and Sakharam Bapu. And therefore at Theur near Pune, he dictated a will, the original of which is actually a copy of the original, written in Nana Fadnis' own handwriting, is in London. So I've got a copy of that which I've put in this book, and I've translated the will in Marathi as well as in English, and just find some of the relevant points here. In fact, you'll find that his, as you say, the religious aspect of Nana Sahib is very visible when you read the points that he mentions in his will. So on 30th of August 1772, First, he writes about the whole of the cash in deposit with Maharji Pant Guruji be applied to the liquidation of the principal of public debt. So all the public debt should be liquidated. Inhabitants of Konkan and Desh have suffered much on account of revenues being found, so they should be indemnified. It is my wish, it was the wish of my revered father to obtain possession of Prayag and Banaras. I have always had the same desire. It is my will, therefore, that these places may now be obtained either by exchange or otherwise as may be expedient. I beg that my venerable mother, who wishes to go to Banaras to reside, may be permitted to do so. The Kriya of Bhausaheb can be done, widow Parvatibai and so on. The annual charities at Banaras be increased 1/2 from this date. Let 200,000 Brahmins be fed at Banaras on my account. Let each receive 2 pice. And let a jagir of 5 lakhs given to them. So this 3 of these 9 points of his will are related to Kashi and Prayag and what should be done there. So that itself shows his very conservative nature. In fact, in the entire Peshwa period, you find that Chimajiappa's wife went sati, and Madhavrao's wife also went sati. But there's one very subtle reference in one letter, where a month and a half before he dies, he calls his wife and advises her. Now, by this advice, it means that he has advised her that she should go sati after his death, because he knew now that it's a matter of time. So that gives you a different picture of what Madhavrau's personality was, that he was on the one hand a person who had a lot of probity in his dealings, and he never took public money into his private account, and he made sure that everything was done by his chiefs, but at the same time he was very conservative religious, which was a sign of the times. Those times were very conservative times, and that time he followed these things to a T, to the very end.
I think before we go to the summing up, something about the judiciary that he put in place and Ram Shastri Prabhune, who acted as the chief judge.
Yeah, Ram Shastri Prabhune is the most famous chief justice of the Maratha period. The movie which came out by Prabhat made him even more famous. And he was again a stickler, like Ram Shastri Prabhune, the Maharji Pant Guruji, who was supposed to be, his surname was Karkare, and he was supposed to be his teacher from his younger days, Nana Fadnis. These are the people who the Peshwa had implicit trust in their honesty and their dealings with everybody. So Ram Shastri, of course, was not just a chief justice, but at one occasion when he came to meet the Peshwa, he found the Peshwa was busy with his prayers and puja and all these things. So when he comes out, he says that please give me leave to go back to my village, because or you go and sit in some pilgrimage place and carry out your pujas there, because as the ruler of a kingdom, you can't spend 1 and 2 hours doing these puja part in the morning. It's not doesn't behove you to do this. So the Peshwa accepted that advice, and whenever he needed advice, he would go to Ram Shastri asking him for advice, because he knew that he will get the correct advice from this person. And so all the judgments of Ram Shastri, whichever he gave at that time, they were in accordance with the prevailing laws, whatever they were, but they were also very logical. Some of these give very, that he applies his mind, which doesn't have any basis in a written document. He just uses his, innovates and gives justice to the people before him.
Dr. Gadgil, I would request you to do a general summing up of not just.
May I ask a question before
Sure,
you do
sure,
the
sure.
summing up?
In the context of Indian history, one would ask a question: if the Marathas knew the British and they are warning that be careful, don't allow them, and yet they do nothing, and they allow the British to outmaneuver and outwit all the powers one by one. Hyder Ali and his dynasty in the south, Nizam, Awadh, and eventually the Marathas. And they divorced the last Peshwa in 1817 and sent him to Batu. How do we explain this? That you know, that letter shows that he is quite conscious of the fact of the British threat. And yet, you keep on fighting amongst themselves. What sort of wisdom was that?
Actually, that fall of the Maratha Empire starts from the book after this. That's why it's very often said that the death of this young prince, Madhavrao, was more fatal to the fortunes of the Maratha Empire than the plains of Panipat, than the loss of the plains of Panipat, because he died at the age of 27 and a half. And because after his death, his younger brother, who was 16 years of age again, becomes the Peshwa. He doesn't have the sagacity of his elder brother, and his uncle is still the same ambitious young person, old person, and his younger brother who becomes the Peshwa, in fact he creates certain, he gives some orders in those 8-9 months where he creates new problems and new adversaries. One is he imposes further restrictions on Raghunath, thereby antagonizing him even further. Then there are some other incidents which come up which are related to the caste divide among the Marathas.
We must acknowledge that
Yes.
we were very weak fighting
Yes.
amongst ourselves.
No, we were a feudal society. We were a feudal society, and from father to son inheritance which was going on, that eventually for 4 generations it worked quite well. The 5th generation onwards it was not effective. From the Chhatrapati the power came to the Peshwa. From the Peshwa it went to his ministers and generals after the death of Narayana.
Hereditary. You make Peshwa Prime Minister hereditary. I mean, that itself is a tragedy of history.
But that was a system in India in those days. And it still is to a certain extent.
Just to add to that, if we have a look at the 18th century history very carefully, yes, undoubtedly there were numerous rivalries within, not only the different kingdoms which were there within the Indian subcontinent, but within each and every kingdom. So we all know, Lasi, there were numerous Sardars on the side of the Nawab of Bengal who deserted and joined the English ranks. Even with Buxar, Dr. Kulkarni just narrated the incident of rivalries between the three.
Rai Durlab, his own military man, did not even move his army.
Rai Durlab, Mir Jafar, Manik Chand, all of them. So it's the same thing. But when it comes to the Marathas, that has been argued by some that there is some kind of a proto-nationalism which was in the emergence, but we do not see all the Peshwas having a kind of an identity or the true fear from the English. The letters have changed over the 3 books also, if we see. So for example, from the Bajirao times, there were few letters in which English are the most trustworthy, it has been said. That whatever they write, they are writing good. They are concerned only with business and not like the other Topikas, particularly the Portuguese, with whom the Marathas did not have a very cordial relation, let us say that. To the extent that when we come to Madhavrao's time, Madhavrao is writing a letter that look after the English. They should not come to Delhi. They are the ones who cannot be uprooted. So perhaps Madhavrao was realizing that there is a problem, but he was at the same time not taking any concrete steps to curtail the rising English menace. Now, we can build arguments. An argument can be perhaps he wanted to restore the Maratha presence first in Delhi and then focus on the English after subduing all the enemies around him. But at the same time, you also have the policy of ring fence, which eventually the British follow, surrounding the Marathas with feudatory chiefs or chiefs who would be loyal to the English and wait for an appropriate time to strike against the Marathas, which they eventually do. At the same time, Madhavrao's death perhaps is a loss, in the sense that he is a person who was visualizing the rise of the English. Perhaps if we go into ifs and buts in history, I know that is not permitted, but there are a lot of history fiction writers who are emerging. So if we take that liberty over here, and if it would have been there, perhaps we don't know what kind of steps would have been taken, or perhaps it would have remained the same, that a policy of containment, we will not go into their territories and let us wait for the future what it upholds. But one thing is certain, that you do not have any direct confrontation with the English that could be seen. Interestingly, there's also a very good episode which has been marked out at the end, that on the day when Madhavrao died, You have the English taking the city of Bharuch. So you have the English also at the same time waiting perhaps for Madhavrao and the Marathas to weaken in order to strike. So that also somewhere comes into the picture.
There were 3 Anglo-Maratha wars. It was not that they didn't try to stop them. The first went on for 8 long years, 1774 to 1782. And it was practically a stalemate at the end of it. The both of them were unable to get the better of the other. And the English were diplomatically far superior in the sense they could get people as allies against the Marathas at that time.
My point is, if the Marathas, the Nizam and the Mysore, they had united, they would have pushed the British.
But they did. From 1780 to 1782, the Triple Alliance was engineered by Nana Fadnis, where Hyder
Only man who understood it.
by Hyder Ali,
The British gave.
Hyder Ali, the Nizam and the Marathas came together to push out the English, and that the 1780 to 1782 period was when these 3 powers met. With Hyder Ali's death, this and because Mahatma Shindya signed the treaty at Salbai with the English, this effort failed because they found that they could not succeed. And Warren Hastings at that time was sending feelers for peace with the Marathas, and Mahatma Shinde's ambitions was to reach Delhi. At that time, he had lost the fort of Gwalior to the English. The Rana of Gohad was protected by the English, which is not far from Gwalior, again south of the Chambal. And both these places were lost by Scindia in that first Anglo-Maratha war. He was keen to get those places, cross the Chambal and go to Delhi. For his own reasons, therefore, you find that in signing the Treaty of Salbai, when it is opposed by Nana Fadnis sitting in Pune, because he has given his word to Hyder Ali that he will not sign a treaty with the English without Hyder Ali's concurrence. When Mahaji signs the treaty and sends it for approval to the Peshwa, who was of course a young boy at that time, Nana was practically doing all the signing. Nana refuses to sign that treaty as long as Hyder Ali is alive. So though the treaty is signed before, Hyder Ali dies in December 1782 and Nana signs the treaty in January 1783. So he wanted to keep his word to Hyder Ali that I will not sign it till he died. And that ended the first Anglo-Maratha war.
In fact, the first Anglo-Maratha on this alliance that you were speaking of, it's a very interesting thing to note. The Marathas, or the English entered into an alliance with the Marathas, possibly because they understood that they could not fight against 2 stronger foes at the same time. Mysore was much easier to fight. There were already earlier Mysore wars that had been fought. Mysore would be easier to overcome. So it was good to make quick peace with the Marathas. And since Nana Fadnis was not engaging in any healthy dialogue, so as to say, you have eventually it being signed with Shinde. Along with that, 1782 Treaty of Salbai, if you look at it carefully, it is not a peace treaty, it's kind of an armistice. It's a, in a kid's language, perhaps, the time please that we take during playing a game, that for the next 20 years we are not going to fight a war. So it's a 20 years armistice which has been established between the English and the Marathas, and the English are very clever, shrewd diplomats. In the next 20 years, their plan is to subdue all the other states surrounding the Marathas, wait for the Marathas to get weakened, and then strike back. And the English, perhaps a stickler for time, as the Nehru Centre is, that exactly 20 years later, on the 31st of December, 1802, you have the treaty which is signed with Bajirao II, the Treaty of Basing, which in 1803 leads to the Second Anglo-Maratha War. So you do have the English who are the shrewd diplomats. So from the Marathas being in alliance with Mysore in the first Anglo-Maratha and the second Anglo-Mysore War, to the Marathas going in alliance with the English in the third Anglo-Mysore War.
It is my contention that we allowed ourselves to be outwitted and outmaneuvered.
Definitely.
That is what the problem is, no matter what we try to say.
I got a question. We are always focusing on the British and the Marathas and all those things. Nowhere there is a mention of French intervention or the Maharaja Shinde appointing Dubois for his command and all those things, or the Hyder Ali getting help from the French in the south. No mention is there in this.
Basically, the Anglo-French rivalry began in much earlier. And it ended with the capture of Pondicherry by the English in 1761, which was where the last book, Nana Sahib Peshwa, ended. The French were during Nana Sahib's time, the French were not on the scene as far as Du Bois' army, which was formed by Mahatma Shinde. It was much later, 1787 to be precise. And as far as the French coming back, they had their own revolution in 1789 in their own in Paris, and the monarchy ended at that time. So they kind of faded from the scene over a period of time. And there were very few instances of like Nana Fadnis trying to bring pressure on the English by propping up a French ambassador who comes to Pune, according him great respect, bringing him on an elephant to show the English or to kind of. So these maneuvers going for the French were not strong enough during that period to really take a stand against the English. As far as Hyder Ali was concerned, French were not on the scene during his time. It was later, in 1784 onwards. Now the question of why the English and the Marathas got together was because Tipu Sultan, who came to power after his father died in 1783, he continued to fight with the English in the Carnatic and the Marathas in the north. And to such an extent that they both were initially for almost 5 years fighting him independently. And finally they realized that this is one man, inveterate enemy of both of us, who is trying to take our territory and attacking us repeatedly. So from 1784 to 1790, for 6 years, Tipu Sultan was attacking the Marathas in the north, and of course his many actions of extreme behavior to the local population are apart. But these two therefore got together, and the Nizam, attacking the Nizam also. Therefore these three powers, they got together against Tipu Sultan to bring him down a peg or two. And 1790 to 1792, the war which was fought with these three in alliance, the Nizam, the Marathas, the English, was to reduce Tipu's power, which they succeeded. Tipu had to give his sons in hostage to Lord Cornwallis. He was left with a small king. In fact, the English wanted to finish him off at that stage. It was a Maratha general who said, no, we don't want to finish him, we just want to reduce his power. So he's not a nuisance to his neighbors. They wanted the Mysore state to continue. The Marathas never wanted to extinguish the Mysore state. They only wanted them to accept their overlordship and to continue paying the south on time. And that intention continued even in 1792 when the treaty was signed with Tipu Sultan. After 1792, when Napoleon started rising in Europe and Tipu Sultan became trifling with the French and with Napoleon, that is when the English again decided that no, by reducing his power is not enough. Now that the French are likely to come here, when Napoleon reached Egypt, alarm bells were ringing in India that now the next stop for Napoleon will be that he will help Tipu Sultan to attack the English here. So that is when they decided now we'll put this guy down, and that is what led to the final Anglo-Mysore war which put him down. And the Marathas were imploding at that time. They were fighting amongst themselves because there was nobody to, the succession battle for the Peshwa when Bajirao II came. That's a horrific chapter. 14 months there was no Peshwa in Pune. Nana Fadnis was put in prison for 6 months. So those incidences, when you read what kind of things were going on, it was total anarchy in the main nerve center. The Marathas were told to send an army to fight with Tipu in the final battle. Though Nana Fadnis had promised that I will send it, he could not send it because the battle was going on in Pune and Nana had no power left. Because Bajirao was his enemy, because Bajirao's father, Raghunathrao, Nana had fought against him. So Maratha power actually imploded because of the internal, so Holkars and the Scindias, they actually fought on the battlefield in the north, where the Holkars were defeated. The final second Anglo-Maratha war, when the Peshwa was driven out of Pune, was again because Holkar attacked and defeated the Scindia and Peshwa's forces. So there are so many things which happened at that time. The Bhosles of Nagpur were allowing the English forces to go through his territory from Calcutta to Madras because he got 30 lakh rupees from the English. So this is the kind of situation which was happening.
Question. Shall I ask? So, sir, in the chapter Booksar,
there is a letter, I don't remember from whom. Yeah, Buxar, sorry. There is a letter which said that the main losing factor for Shujaud-Dowla was the disassembly of his army, and the winning factor for the English was the more disciplined army which they had, even though their numbers were small. And we see a pattern similar in Battle of Asai, where Arthur Wellesley had a smaller army and Daulat of India had a larger army. Do you think the discipline factor played a role in the battles against the British throughout the history?
Yeah, the army discipline was what it was. I mean, it was Sar Salamat to Pagdi Pachas, fight another day. So when Buxar was a classic case of Shujaud-Dowla grabbing defeat from the jaws of victory. He was going to win that battle. But when his soldiers behave foolishly and instead of attacking the army, go and start looting baggage of the enemy, that advantage is lost. So it was indiscipline by these elements which are fighting over there. In Asai, at least the Marathas put up a very strong battle. Though Daulat of Scindia was not present in the battlefield. And that's why Wellesley, when he describes it as the closest battle he's fought, was Asai. Yeah. So that was probably, it could have gone either way. But Asai wouldn't have made a difference because in the north already the Marathas had lost 4 battles by that time. The Scindia forces with Lord Lake. So they were already on the back foot by that time.
Thank you everyone. Thank you Dr. Kulkarni. Thank you Dr. Gadgil. Thanks for joining us for all these sessions, and I would like to thank the Nehru Centre for giving us an opportunity.
May I also thank the Nehru Centre for inviting me here and Dr. Gadgil for coming here each time. Soniya and Amit Paranspe who is not here, and all the audience which has been putting up so bravely all the discourses and explanations which you have given and the intricate details for the last 3 sessions. I really must thank all of you for being here. Thanks a lot.
So, but this Dr. Kulkarni is such a popular historian. He has this unique style of narrating history in the form of storytelling. So I'm tempted to have history evenings with Dr. Kulkarni if Nehru Centre allows this. But a lesser known fact is that he is such a popular historian that his books are available even in general stores in Mahabaleshwar. I mean, I was just walking down the mall one day and I went to one store to buy newspapers and some grocery items, and I saw his books out there. So I asked the salesperson, I said, Dr. Kulkarni ki book yahan pe? So he told me, nahi, madam, bahut popular hai author. So that shows, and that needs a big applause to him.
Thanks to Mr. Irani actually. He's a fan of Maratha history, so he keeps the books there.
Yeah, but still, they sell like hotcakes, I believe. So thank you again, Dr. Kulkarni. Thank you, Dr. Gadgil. Thank you, Soniya, for being here every time for the last 3 months. And thank you, audience, and very good night. Thank you so much.